Sarah Davis had always prided herself on being a woman who could handle anything. She was the loving mother of two young children, Ella and Max, a devoted wife to her husband, Tom, and a passionate pediatric nurse who had dedicated her life to caring for others. At 35, Sarah felt as though she had it all: a stable career, a beautiful family, and a home filled with laughter and love. She was healthy, strong, and capable. Life was busy, but it was fulfilling. But all of that changed the day Sarah felt the first signs of something wrong. It started as a dull, persistent ache in her chest. At first, she didn't think much of it. After all, she had been running on little sleep and juggling long shifts at the hospital with the demands of motherhood. It was likely just stress, but the pain didn't go away. Instead, it spread down her back and into her shoulders. Sarah tried to brush it off as muscle strain, perhaps from overexertion. But the ache lingered, and the tightness in her chest grew worse, to the point where it started to interfere with her breathing. She tried to ignore it for a few more days, telling herself it was nothing. But it wasn't getting better, and she began to feel more fatigued than usual. She didn't feel sick, but the pain was constant. It gnawed at her. She decided to schedule an appointment with Dr. Harris, her trusted family physician, just to rule out any serious concerns. Dr. Harris listened patiently as Sarah explained her symptoms. After a thorough checkup, he reassured her that it was probably nothing to worry about. However, he decided to schedule some tests, just to be sure. Sarah left the office feeling somewhat relieved, thinking it was likely just a muscle strain or some minor condition that could easily be treated. But the feeling that something was wrong continued to gnaw at her. The days passed, and Sarah kept herself busy, trying to focus on work and her family. But the ache in her chest didn't go away. It persisted, and when the phone call came from Dr. Harris's office, Sarah immediately felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. "Sarah, I need you to come in to discuss the results of your tests," Dr. Harris said, his voice uncharacteristically serious. The knot in Sarah's stomach tightened. She tried to tell herself it was nothing, that the doctor just wanted to be thorough. But deep down, she knew this call wasn't good. She asked Tom to come with her, needing his strength as they headed back to Dr. Harris's office. The waiting room was quiet when they arrived, and Sarah felt the heavy silence pressing in on her. She tried to stay calm, but her mind was racing, and she could sense Tom's unease beside her. His usual calm was replaced by the same knot of anxiety she felt inside. When they were finally called into the exam room, Dr. Harris was already sitting at his desk, the test results in front of him. His demeanor was calm, but there was a subtle change in his expression, one that didn't quite reassure Sarah. "Sarah, I've reviewed your tests," Dr. Harris began, looking directly at her. "There's something concerning. We've found a mass in your lung, and after further investigation, it appears to be cancer. It has spread to your lymph nodes, and it's stage 4. The words were like a punch in the chest. Cancer. Stage 4. Sarah felt the world around her shift, her mind struggling to comprehend what Dr. Harris was saying. It was all too much. Cancer wasn't something that happened to people like her, healthy people who took care of their bodies. She was a nurse. She had seen patients battle cancer, but she had never imagined she would be one of them. Her vision blurred, and she could hear Tom's voice, but it felt distant. "What does this mean?" Sarah managed to whisper. "I don't understand. Stage 4? Is it too late? Dr. Harris's tone softened. It's not too late, but the cancer has spread. We'll start chemotherapy right away. We have options. Treatment that will help manage it. But I want you to know, this is serious. The words continued to swirl around Sarah's mind, and she couldn't process them. Stage 4 cancer? It wasn't just a diagnosis, it was a death sentence, or so it felt in that moment. Tom, who'd been holding her hand, squeezed it tighter. We'll fight this, he said, his voice trembling. We're not going to give up. We'll do whatever it takes. But Sarah wasn't sure if she believed him. How could she fight something so insurmountable? How could she win against something that was already so deeply embedded in her body? The next few days were a blur. Sarah could barely keep track of the appointments, the tests, and the mounting paperwork. The reality of her diagnosis seemed like a bad dream, one that she couldn't wake up from. Chemotherapy was scheduled to begin within the week, but Sarah wasn't sure she was ready. How could she prepare for something like this? How could she face the fear of the unknown, the possibility of not being there for her children, the thought of leaving Ella and Max, of missing their milestones, of not being there to guide them through their lives, filled Sarah with a profound sadness. She didn't want to leave them. She couldn't imagine a world without them. But the thought of being taken away from them, of not getting to hold them as they grew older, broke her heart. That night, Sarah and Tom lay together in bed, the weight of the news pressing on both of them. Tom had always been her rock, the steady presence in their relationship, but Sarah could feel the fear radiating from him now. He was scared, just as scared as she was, but he was hiding it behind his calm demeanor. I don't know what to do, Sarah whispered, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know how to face this. I don't know how to fight it. Tom pulled her closer, his voice thick with emotion. You're not alone, Sarah. I'm right here with you. We'll get through this. You're stronger than you think. But Sarah wasn't sure she could believe him. She wasn't sure she had the strength to face this fight. Everything she had known, everything she had worked for, was suddenly out of her control. The first day of chemotherapy arrived. Sarah sat in a sterile chair, the IV needle in her arm, the chemotherapy drugs slowly entering her body. She was terrified of the side effects, terrified of what was happening to her body, but even more so, terrified of what would happen to her family if she couldn't beat this. The chemicals coursing through her veins felt like poison, but she had no choice. She had to trust the process, no matter how difficult it seemed. Her body reacted immediately. The nausea, the fatigue. It was overwhelming. She couldn't remember the last time she felt so weak, so out of control. She had always been the one to take care of others, the one who was always healthy, always strong. Now, she was the one who needed help. And that feeling of dependence was something she had never wanted to face. The days following Sarah's first chemotherapy treatment were a blur of exhaustion, pain, and nausea. She had expected the side effects, but nothing could have prepared her for how deeply they would affect her. The chemotherapy drugs coursing through her veins were working to kill the cancer, but they were also stripping her body of everything that made her feel like herself. Her hair began to fall out in clumps, leaving her feeling vulnerable and exposed. The fatigue was relentless, weighing her down even during the most mundane tasks. It felt as though her body was betraying her. She spent most of her days in bed, trying to rest, but the constant nausea made it hard to get comfortable. The thought of food made her stomach turn, but she forced herself to eat, knowing that it was the only way to keep her strength up. She was constantly dizzy, her energy drained, and every time she looked in the mirror, the woman staring back at her was a stranger. Tom, as always, was there by her side. He would sit with her for hours, holding her hand while she rested, comforting her when the waves of nausea became too overwhelming. Sarah could see the toll this was taking on him as well. He had always been the strong one, the one who kept the family grounded, but now Sarah could see the fear in his eyes. He was afraid, not just of what was happening to her, but of what might happen if she didn't make it through. One night, as Sarah lay in bed, Tom came in to sit beside her. The kids were with his parents for the weekend, giving Sarah and Tom some much-needed time to be alone. "I hate seeing you like this," Tom said softly, brushing a strand of Sarah's hair from her face. "I don't know how to help you." "You're helping me just by being here," Sarah whispered, her voice tired. "I don't know how I'd get through this without you." Tom squeezed her hand. "You don't have to do it alone, Sarah. We're in this together." But despite Tom's reassuring words, Sarah couldn't shake the fear that gripped her. She felt like she was losing control of everything. The cancer had already taken so much from her. Her strength, her vitality, her sense of self. And she feared that it would continue to take piece by piece until there was nothing left. She wasn't ready to face that. She wasn't ready to give up. A few days after the first round of chemotherapy, Sarah received a call from Dr. Harris. He wanted her to come in for a follow-up, to check how she was responding to the treatment. Tom drove her to the hospital, the silence in the car heavy with the unspoken questions that both of them had. Would the chemotherapy be working? Would the cancer start to shrink? Or would the treatment cause even more damage than it was worth? When they arrived at the hospital, Dr. Harris greeted them warmly, but Sarah could see the concern in his eyes. He led them into his office, where he sat down across from them and opened Sarah's medical file. "Sarah," he began, his tone calm but serious, "I've looked over your scans, and there is some positive news. The tumors have started to shrink. They're not gone, but they're smaller than they were before. Your body is responding to the chemotherapy, and that's a good sign." For the first time in what felt like weeks, Sarah allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. She looked at Tom, who was staring at Dr. Harris with a mix of disbelief and relief. "It's working?" Sarah asked, her voice shaky. Dr. Harris nodded. "It's working. This is exactly the kind of response we want to see at this stage, but we still have a long road ahead of us. The cancer isn't gone, and we need to continue with the treatment. But this is a step in the right direction." Tom reached over and took Sarah's hand, his voice thick with emotion. "This is the news we've been waiting for." Sarah tried to take it all in. The thought that the chemotherapy was actually working, that the tumors were shrinking, was a small victory. It wasn't a cure, but it was hope. Hope that she could survive this. Hope that she could see her children grow up. Hope that she could have a future. But even with this new hope, Sarah knew the battle was far from over. The treatment wasn't easy, and the side effects would only get worse as the weeks went on. She couldn't let herself become complacent, couldn't let herself relax just because there was some good news. She had to keep fighting. Over the next few weeks, Sarah's routine settled into a grueling pattern. Chemotherapy every few days, followed by a few days of rest, while the side effects took hold. The nausea was still overwhelming. The fatigue was unrelenting. But Sarah continued to push through. She didn't have a choice. She couldn't give up now, not when she was so close to seeing progress. Tom continued to support her in every way he could. He made sure she ate, helped her get out of bed when she felt too weak, and stayed by her side during every treatment. But Sarah could see the toll it was taking on him. He wasn't just worried about her. He was worried about what would happen if the treatment didn't work, if the cancer returned, if she didn't survive this. The fear in his eyes was impossible to ignore. One evening, after another round of chemotherapy, Sarah was lying in bed, her body too weak to do much else. Tom sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her arm. "Sarah," he said softly, "I don't know how you're doing this. I don't know how you're getting through it, but I see the strength in you. I see the fight in you." Sarah smiled weakly. "I have to fight, Tom. For you. For the kids. I can't just give up. I can't let cancer take everything from us." Tom kissed her forehead, his voice filled with emotion. "You're not giving up. You're fighting. And we're fighting with you. All of us." The words meant everything to Sarah. In those quiet moments, she found the strength to keep going. She wasn't alone in this fight. She had Tom, she had Ella and Max, and she had the will to keep fighting, no matter how difficult it became. Weeks passed, and with each passing day, Sarah found herself growing more accustomed to the routine of chemotherapy. It wasn't easy. Every cycle left her feeling more fatigued, and the side effects, the nausea, the dizziness, the physical weakness, were wearing her down. But despite the overwhelming exhaustion and pain, Sarah was determined. She had already faced so much. She couldn't let cancer take her without a fight. Her body felt like a battlefield. The chemotherapy drugs were attacking the cancer cells, but they were also attacking her healthy cells, leaving her weak and vulnerable. The hair loss had been difficult to face, and each time she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman she didn't recognize. The woman she had once been, the strong, vibrant nurse, the mother who could take on anything, felt like a distant memory. But she knew she had to hold on, even when it felt like there was nothing left. Tom continued to be her constant, always there by her side. He drove her to every treatment, sat with her during the long hours of the sessions, and made sure she had everything she needed. But Sarah could see how much it was affecting him too. She knew he was trying to be strong for her, but she could feel the weight of his own fear pressing down on him. He was terrified of losing her. She could see it in the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking, in the way his voice faltered when he tried to reassure her. One evening, after yet another exhausting chemotherapy session, Sarah lay in bed, her body aching from the treatments. Tom sat beside her, his hand resting on hers, offering silent support. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently, his voice filled with concern. Sarah sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. "I'm tired, Tom. So tired. I don't know how much longer I can do this. I'm just so drained." Tom leaned over and kissed her forehead. "I know it's hard, but you're doing amazing. You're fighting with everything you have, and that's all we can ask for. We're in this together, Sarah. We're not going anywhere." The tenderness in his voice brought tears to Sarah's eyes. It wasn't just the fear of cancer that had been overwhelming her. It was the fear of what would happen to Tom, to Ella, to Max, if she couldn't fight through this. But as she looked at Tom, she realized that she wasn't fighting alone. She never had been. She had her family, her friends, and a deep well of strength within herself that she hadn't even known was there. "I'm not ready to give up," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with resolve. "I'm not ready to leave you and the kids. I'm going to keep fighting. I have to." Tom smiled through his own tears, brushing a strand of hair from Sarah's face. "I know you will. You've already shown me how strong you are. You've shown us all." Days turned into weeks, and Sarah continued to face the harsh realities of her treatments. But the small victories began to accumulate. Her energy, though still low, was returning in small bursts. She could stand up without feeling dizzy. She could eat a meal without feeling nauseous. She even managed to take a short walk around the block one afternoon, something that had felt impossible just weeks earlier. The strength she once had was slowly returning, and though she was still far from healthy, each small step forward was a victory. It was during one of these walks that Sarah had a moment of clarity. As she walked slowly down the sidewalk with Tom by her side, she stopped for a moment and looked up at the sky. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the horizon. The colors, deep oranges and soft purples, reminded her of the beauty that still existed in the world, even amidst the battle she was fighting. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a sense of peace. She was still terrified of what the future might hold, but in that moment, she realized that she wasn't fighting for just survival. She was fighting for the chance to live again, to hold on to the moments that mattered the most. Tom looked at her, noticing the change in her expression. "You okay?" he asked. Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with something that hadn't been there before. "Yeah," she said softly. "I'm okay. I'm going to be okay." Back at home, the support from friends and family continued to pour in. Ella and Max, though still young, were more aware of what was happening than Sarah had expected. They knew that their mom wasn't feeling well, and they often asked her when she would be better, when she would be able to play with them again. Sarah tried her best to reassure them, though the truth was, she didn't know. She didn't know when the treatments would be over, or if they would even work. But she did know that she would do everything she could to be there for them, to be the mother they deserved. Tom had taken on more than his fair share of the household responsibilities. He managed the kids' schedules, made dinner, and still found time to sit with Sarah after her treatments. His support was unshakable, and Sarah often marveled at his strength. But she could see the toll it was taking on him as well. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, and the pressure of managing everything at home were wearing him thin. One evening, as Sarah lay in bed, she noticed Tom sitting at the edge of the room, his head in his hands, deep in thought. He didn't see her watching him, but Sarah could tell he was overwhelmed. "Tom?" she called softly. He looked up, startled, but quickly composed himself. "I'm okay, Sarah. Just tired." Sarah sat up in bed, pushing aside the blankets. "You're doing so much for me and the kids. You need to take care of yourself, too." Tom shook his head. "I can't think about myself right now. You need me." "I need you to take care of yourself, too," Sarah said, her voice gentle but firm. "We're in this together, but you can't keep carrying all of this alone." Tom met her gaze, and for a moment, Sarah could see the exhaustion in his eyes. But then, he smiled softly, a tired but genuine smile. "I'm just trying to keep things together. For you, for the kids. And you're doing an amazing job," Sarah said, reaching out to take his hand. "But we'll get through this, Tom. I can't do it without you. And you can't do it alone either. As the days stretched into weeks, Sarah continued to fight. The chemotherapy was still difficult, but with each passing day, she felt a little stronger. The treatments weren't easy, but they were working, and Sarah was ready to keep going, one day at a time, with the hope that she would come out of this stronger than before. The days began to blend together, each one similar to the last. Sarah had become accustomed to the routine of chemotherapy, treatments every few weeks, followed by days of recovery and rest. But even though the side effects of the treatment were still tough to endure, she felt a sense of pride in the progress she had made. It wasn't just the shrinking tumors, though that was a victory in itself. It was the emotional strength she had found within herself. Sarah's energy had begun to improve, though not by much. She still had her moments of intense fatigue, where just getting out of bed felt like a monumental task. But there were small victories along the way. She could walk around the block without feeling like she was going to collapse. She could eat a full meal without the nausea overwhelming her. These moments, though they seemed small, were enough to keep her going. The fear of relapse still lingered in the back of her mind. Every scan, every treatment brought a fresh wave of worry. Would the tumors start to grow again? Would the chemotherapy stop working? But Sarah was learning to face those fears head on. She couldn't control the outcome, but she could control how she responded to it. And she was choosing to fight every single day. One morning, as Sarah sat on the porch, drinking her tea and watching the sun rise, she felt a deep sense of peace. It was a rare moment of calm. The sky was clear, and the world around her seemed still. For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to simply breathe and reflect. She had been so focused on the fight, on surviving, that she had forgotten to appreciate the little things, the moments of quiet, the beauty of a new day, the love of her family. As she sat there, Tom came out and joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside her, the morning sun casting a soft glow on his face. He looked at her, and for a moment, Sarah could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that had been there since the day of her diagnosis. "You're quiet this morning," Tom said softly, handing her a cup of coffee. "I'm just thinking," Sarah replied, taking the cup from him. "I'm starting to realize that this isn't just about getting through cancer. It's about living too. Even in the middle of all this, there's still so much to be thankful for." Tom looked at her, his expression softening. "I know. We've been through a lot. But you've come so far, Sarah. I can see it. You're not just surviving anymore. You're living." Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know if I'd be here without you, Tom. You've been my strength when I didn't have any left." Tom took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're in this together, Sarah. I'll always be by your side. I'm so proud of you." The words meant more to Sarah than she could express. She had always been the one to take care of others, to be the strong one, but now she was learning to accept help, to rely on the people she loved. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, she realized how much strength there was in allowing others to care for her. She didn't have to fight this battle alone. The following week, Sarah had a follow-up appointment with Dr. Harris. She was nervous, as always, but there was something different this time. After months of chemotherapy, Sarah felt a deep sense of strength that she hadn't felt before. She was no longer afraid to ask the difficult questions. She was no longer afraid of hearing bad news. She was determined to fight for her life, no matter what. Dr. Harris greeted her warmly, as always, but Sarah could see the weight of the past few months in his eyes. He had seen countless patients come and go, but Sarah's fight had touched him. He had seen her determination, her resilience, and he admired her strength. He sat down with her and Tom, opening her file with a careful hand. "Sarah," Dr. Harris began, "I have some good news. The scans show that the tumors have continued to shrink. There's still some cancer left, but it's significantly smaller than it was when we started treatment. You're responding well to the chemotherapy." For a moment, Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. The tumors were shrinking. She had known that the treatment was helping, but hearing it from Dr. Harris, hearing the confirmation that the battle was being won, made her heart swell with relief. It wasn't over, but this was a huge step forward. Tom's face lit up with joy, and he reached out to take Sarah's hand. "We did it, Sarah. We're really doing it." Sarah smiled through the tears that threatened to fall. She had never imagined that she would be sitting here, listening to Dr. Harris say that her cancer was shrinking. She had always hoped, but now it felt real. She was beating cancer, and she was going to keep fighting, no matter how hard it got. The next few days were filled with a renewed sense of hope. Sarah felt stronger, both physically and emotionally. She continued with her chemotherapy, but there was a new determination in her heart. She no longer felt as though she were just surviving. She felt like she was living again. She was making plans for the future, no longer weighed down by the constant fear of the unknown. Tom, too, had a new light in his eyes. He had always been her rock, but now he seemed to believe that the battle was winnable. He was more optimistic, more hopeful, and his belief in Sarah's recovery gave her even more strength. Together, they had been through so much, but they were learning to cherish the small victories, the moments of peace that came in the midst of the chaos. One evening, as Sarah sat in the living room with Tom, their children playing nearby, she realized that this was what she had been fighting for. She wasn't just fighting for her own survival. She was fighting for her family, for the life she wanted to continue living. Cancer had taken so much from her already, but she wasn't going to let it take her future. She had come so far, and though the road ahead was still uncertain, she knew one thing for sure. She was not giving up. Not now. Not ever. Sarah's life had begun to feel like a strange combination of routine and uncertainty. The weeks since her last visit to Dr. Harris had brought about small but meaningful changes. Chemotherapy was still draining, but the progress she'd made, both physically and emotionally, was undeniable. The tumors were shrinking, and with each passing day, Sarah found herself becoming more and more determined to keep fighting. Her energy was slowly returning, though it was still limited. She had good days and bad days, days when she felt almost normal, and others when she barely had the strength to get out of bed. But the good days, though rare, felt like small victories in a battle that was far from over. On one of her better days, Sarah took the kids to the park. It had been a long time since she'd had the strength to do something so simple, and she couldn't remember the last time she had been able to run around with them. The sight of Max and Ella laughing, running ahead of her on the grass, filled Sarah's heart with joy. It was moments like this that made her realize why she was fighting. why she couldn't give up. Tom was with them, of course. He always was. He was there, supporting her every step of the way, even though he was still exhausted. Sarah could see how the weight of the past few months had taken a toll on him, but his love and devotion never wavered. He was there, always present, always steady. For that, she was endlessly grateful. But as Sarah watched her children play, a sense of melancholy washed over her. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping away. Every moment with them was precious. Every moment with Tom was precious. The thought of missing any more of their lives, of being taken away from them, haunted her. The fear of relapse was always there, lingering in the back of her mind. The fear crept in when she wasn't expecting it. Late one evening, after a busy day of taking care of the kids, Sarah found herself lying in bed, wide awake. She was exhausted, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind was spinning with thoughts of what the future held. Would the cancer come back? Would the treatments continue to work? Would she make it through this battle? She thought about how different her life had become, how everything she once took for granted had been upended by this disease. The fear of relapse was a constant presence. Even though Dr. Harris had reassured her that she was responding well to the treatments, Sarah couldn't shake the anxiety that the cancer would come back stronger, that the chemotherapy would eventually stop working, or that she wouldn't be there for the milestones in her children's lives. Tom must have noticed the shift in her demeanor because, just as she was about to turn the light off, he gently opened the bedroom door. He stood there for a moment, as if waiting for Sarah to say something. Finally, he walked over to the bed and sat down beside her. "Sarah?" he asked softly. "What's going on? You've been quiet all night." Sarah turned to face him, the fear in her eyes more visible than ever. She swallowed hard before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tom, I'm scared. I'm scared I won't make it. I'm scared of missing everything, of not being there for you, for Ella, for Max." Tom's heart ached as he looked at her, his own fear mirrored in his eyes. "I know you're scared, Sarah. I am too. But we're doing this together. You're not going through this alone. We're not going through this alone." Sarah shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. It's hard to keep fighting when I don't know what's going to happen. I want to be strong for you. I want to be strong for the kids. But some days, I don't know if I can keep going." Tom reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Sarah. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel weak. But we're going to fight this together. No matter what happens, we have each other. And we have our kids. We have a future to fight for." Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing the truth in his words. She wasn't alone. Tom was with her every step of the way. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, she knew that she couldn't give up. Not now. Not when there was still so much to live for. In the weeks that followed, Sarah began to see the impact of her emotional resolve. She wasn't just going through the motions of surviving cancer. She was living again, even in the face of uncertainty. The good days still came, though they were sometimes few and far between, but she learned to cherish them. She started making small plans for the future, even if it was just something as simple as a weekend trip with the family, or a dinner at home with Tom and the kids. Her recovery was slow, and there were still many tough days ahead, but Sarah had come to realize something crucial. This battle wasn't just about the cancer. It was about living fully, even in the midst of it. It was about showing Ella and Max that life could still be beautiful, even in the hardest of times. The fear of relapse never completely went away, but Sarah learned to quiet it. She chose to focus on what she could control: her attitude, her love for her family, and the strength that came from fighting for a future with them. She wasn't just surviving cancer anymore. She was living in a way that honored the time she had left, regardless of how much time that might be. One afternoon, Sarah was sitting in the garden with Ella and Max, watching them play in the sun. Tom was mowing the lawn nearby, and Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. For the first time in months, she felt like herself again. She wasn't the same woman she had been before the cancer, but she was stronger, more grateful, and more determined than ever to cherish every moment. As the kids ran toward her, laughing and shouting, Sarah realized that this was what she had been fighting for. This was what mattered. She had no idea how much time she had left, but she wasn't going to waste it. She wasn't going to let cancer take her future away. In that moment, she made a promise to herself. No matter what happened, no matter how the journey ended, she would never give up. She would keep fighting, not just for herself, but for the life she wanted to live, for the family she loved, and for the future she still believed was possible. The next few months were a blur of treatments, doctor visits, and moments of triumph. Though the chemotherapy continued to take its toll on Sarah's body, her mental and emotional strength had reached new heights. She was no longer merely surviving the treatment. She was choosing to fight it every step of the way. There were good days, days when the fog of chemotherapy lifted, when her energy returned, even if just for a few hours. These were the days she cherished most, the days when she could spend time with her children and Tom without the overwhelming weight of illness hanging over her. The moments when she felt like herself again, if only for a brief time, reminded her of what she had to fight for. But those good days were often followed by harder ones. The nausea, the dizziness, and the exhaustion still returned, leaving her feeling weak and vulnerable. There were times when the thought of facing another round of treatment seemed too overwhelming to bear. But every time she wanted to give up, she thought of Tom and the kids. She thought of the future she wanted to have with them, of the moments she would miss if she didn't fight. She wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling round of chemotherapy, Sarah found herself sitting on the porch, watching the kids play in the yard. Tom was mowing the lawn, but Sarah couldn't bring herself to move. She was exhausted, her body drained from the treatment, but there was something about the sun on her face and the sounds of Ella and Max's laughter that made her feel grounded. It reminded her of the world she was fighting to stay a part of. Tom came over and sat down beside her, wiping the sweat from his brow. He was still the rock of their family, but Sarah could see the toll the past few months had taken on him. He was tired, physically, emotionally, and mentally, but he never complained. He kept pushing forward for her, for their family. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice soft. "I'm okay," Sarah replied, her voice tired but steady. "Just tired, I guess." Tom nodded, understanding. He didn't need to ask for details anymore. He knew the exhaustion that came with every chemotherapy session, the toll it took on her body. But he also knew the determination that was behind it. Sarah had always been strong, but now she was stronger than ever. And despite the fear that still crept into their hearts, There was hope. They were making progress, and that was all they could hold on to. "I was thinking," Tom said after a long pause, "maybe we should take a short trip. Just the four of us. A weekend getaway. Something to take our minds off things." Sarah looked at him, surprised. She hadn't considered a trip in months. With the treatments, the hospital visits, and the daily demands of life, she hadn't thought about anything beyond the next round of chemotherapy. But the idea of a getaway, a break from the routine, felt like exactly what they needed. "That sounds amazing," Sarah said, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and disbelief. "But are you sure? I don't want to push myself too hard." Tom smiled, taking her hand. "You won't push yourself. It'll just be a few days, a chance for all of us to be together, to enjoy life outside of hospitals and treatments." It was a small moment, but it felt like a victory. Sarah hadn't allowed herself to think about the future in that way before. She had been so focused on surviving, on getting through each treatment, that she had forgotten to live. But now, with Tom's suggestion, she realized that the future was still possible. There was still room for joy, for love, for the little things that made life worth living. The trip was simple, just a weekend at a small cabin in the mountains. But it was everything Sarah had hoped for. She and Tom spent their days hiking, walking along the trails with Ella and Max, and spending time together as a family. For those few days, Sarah didn't think about the cancer, didn't worry about the next round of treatment. She simply focused on being with her family, on experiencing the beauty of nature and the joy of being alive. The kids were happy, their laughter echoing through the trees as they ran ahead of Sarah and Tom on the trails. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was part of the life she had been fighting to keep. She felt the weight of the diagnosis lift, if only for a short time. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Tom and Sarah sat together on the porch, watching the sky change from bright orange to soft pinks and purples. It was one of those perfect moments, still, quiet, and filled with peace. "I needed this," Sarah said quietly, her eyes closed as she took in the beauty of the moment. "I needed to remember what I'm fighting for." Tom squeezed her hand. "We're all fighting with you, Sarah. You don't have to do it alone." As Sarah's treatment continued, she continued to hold on to the memories of that weekend, the laughter of her children, the quiet moments with Tom. She still had difficult days, but she was learning how to make the most of the good ones. She was no longer just enduring the treatment. She was living alongside it, embracing the moments of life that cancer had tried to take away from her. Her next visit to Dr. Harris brought more positive news. The tumors had continued to shrink, though they were not completely gone. There was still a long way to go, but the progress was undeniable. Dr. Harris seemed cautiously optimistic. Sarah's body was responding to the treatment, and although the journey was far from over, the hope that had once seemed distant now felt real. "Sarah, I know it's been tough, but you're doing everything right," Dr. Harris said during their visit. "Your body is responding well, and that's a huge step forward. We'll keep monitoring things closely, but I'm confident that you're on the right track." After the trip to the mountains, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The joy and peace she had experienced with Tom and the kids were exactly what she needed to reinvigorate her spirit. It reminded her of what she was fighting for, not just to survive, but to truly live again. It was the first time since her diagnosis that she allowed herself to think about the future, even if just for a moment. The fear of relapse still loomed, but she had learned to push it aside, if only for a while. Back at home, the routine returned. Chemotherapy was still a difficult process, and each session took more from her than the last. Sarah had come to accept the fatigue, the nausea, the muscle aches. These were just part of the battle, and they no longer felt as insurmountable as they once had. But that didn't make the fight any easier. The hardest part now was staying hopeful, believing that the end result would be worth it, that she would come out of this stronger, and that the pain she was enduring now would one day be behind her. The progress she had made in her physical recovery gave her the strength to keep pushing forward. She wasn't back to full health, but every step toward normalcy felt like a small victory. On days when she felt particularly weak, she reminded herself of the moments of strength. The days when she could walk the kids to school or sit down for a meal with Tom and the children without feeling completely drained. Those small moments had become her lifeline. One morning, after a particularly difficult round of chemotherapy, Sarah woke up feeling more exhausted than ever. She had been hoping for a day of reprieve, a day when her body wouldn't be so tired, when her spirit wouldn't feel so weary. But today wasn't that day. She felt as though the weight of the treatment was pushing her further down. When Tom came into the room, he could see the frustration on her face. She was lying in bed, her hands folded over her chest, staring at the ceiling. He walked over to her, sitting down on the edge of the bed and gently taking her hand. "Hey," Tom said softly, "you doing okay?" Sarah didn't look at him right away. She didn't want to burden him with the sadness she felt inside. She knew how hard it was on him, too. He was her rock, her constant support, but she could feel the weariness in his bones as well. "I'm just tired, Tom," she said quietly. "I'm tired of this, tired of the treatments, tired of feeling like a shell of who I was. I just want to feel like myself again." Tom squeezed her hand, his heart breaking for her. He knew that this journey had been so much harder than Sarah had ever imagined. She had always been the one who was strong, the one who cared for others. But now, she was the one who needed care. And while he was more than happy to provide it, he knew it was hard for her to accept. "You are yourself, Sarah," Tom said gently. "You're just going through a tough time right now. But you're still you, even if it doesn't feel like it. We'll get through this, okay? Together. I'm not going anywhere." Sarah finally turned to look at him, her eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared, Tom. I'm scared that I won't make it. I'm scared that I'll miss out on everything. The kids growing up, the moments that matter. I don't want to leave you." Tom's heart ached as he held her gaze. He wanted to reassure her, to take away the fear that gripped her. But he knew that words couldn't fix everything. "We're in this together, Sarah," Tom said quietly. "You're not leaving us. Not now. Not ever. I can't promise that everything will be easy, but I can promise you that I'll be here every step of the way. We'll make it through this." There was a moment of silence as Sarah took in his words. She wanted to believe them, to believe that she would make it through, but the fear of the unknown was a constant weight on her heart. "I'm tired of being afraid," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Tom. "I want to fight this. I want to live again. I just don't know how." Tom leaned down, kissing her forehead softly. "You're already fighting, Sarah. Every day you fight. You don't have to fight alone. You have me. You have the kids. You have everyone who loves you. A few days later, Sarah had another follow-up appointment with Dr. Harris. This time, she was anxious. Every visit brought a new round of emotions: hope, fear, uncertainty. Would the scans show progress? Would there be more bad news? She had learned not to expect too much, not to get her hopes up too high. But the fear of disappointment lingered. When she arrived at the office, Dr. Harris greeted her with a warm smile. Sarah noticed, however, that his usual calm demeanor had shifted slightly. He looked more serious than he had in the past, and she felt her stomach tighten with apprehension. "Sarah, I've gone over your scans," Dr. Harris began, sitting down across from her and Tom. "And I'm happy to tell you that the results are promising. The tumors have continued to shrink. It's not quite where we want it to be, but there's significant progress." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, the words she had longed to hear. She looked at Tom, who was beaming with joy. His eyes filled with tears as he held her hand tightly. "It's working," Sarah whispered, barely able to believe it. "I'm really getting better?" Dr. Harris nodded. "Yes, Sarah. The treatments are working. You're responding well to the chemotherapy, and while we still have a long way to go, this is definitely a positive sign. You're doing exactly what we hoped you would." The relief that flooded Sarah's chest was overwhelming. She had been so afraid of hearing the opposite, that the cancer was growing, that the treatments weren't working. But now there was hope. There was progress. Tom leaned over and kissed Sarah's cheek, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew it, Sarah. I knew you could do this." Dr. Harris smiled, but there was still caution in his eyes. "You've made incredible progress, Sarah. But we can't let up now. We still have a long road ahead. The next few months are critical. But I have no doubt that you're going to keep fighting this, and we'll be here with you every step of the way." The next few days were filled with a renewed sense of hope. Sarah could feel the difference in her body. She had more energy. The nausea was less frequent. She could see the progress in her scans, and for the first time since her diagnosis, she allowed herself to believe that she might make it through this. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living again. But as Sarah basked in the glow of good news, she knew that the battle was far from over. There were still many challenges ahead, many days of treatment to endure. But for the first time, she felt like she was winning. And that was something she hadn't felt in a long time. After the positive news from Dr. Harris, Sarah found herself filled with a cautious optimism. The tumors were shrinking, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel hope. The long nights of fear and uncertainty had given way to a small but significant victory, and Sarah clung to that victory like a lifeline. But while the cancer was shrinking, the chemotherapy side effects continued to take their toll. The physical exhaustion, the nausea, and the constant fatigue were all part of the battle. Sarah couldn't deny that some days were harder than others. There were mornings when getting out of bed felt impossible, and evenings when she could barely stay awake long enough to eat dinner with her family. But as difficult as it was, she knew she had to keep going. She was fighting for her family, for Tom, for Ella, for Max. She couldn't give up now. Tom, as always, was her anchor. He stood by her side through every treatment, every doctor's visit, and every difficult day. He was the one who made sure she took her medication, who reminded her to rest, and who held her hand when the fear became too overwhelming. He had always been the calm, steady one in their relationship, but Sarah could see the strain the past few months had placed on him. He was tired. She could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the worry etched on his face. He was scared, just like she was. But through it all, he never wavered. He was her rock, the one person who could keep her grounded when everything else seemed to be falling apart. One evening, after another round of chemotherapy, Sarah sat on the couch, feeling more drained than ever. The fatigue had become a constant companion, and there were days when she could barely summon the energy to get out of bed. Tom came over and sat beside her, his hand gently resting on hers. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly, his voice filled with concern. Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. "Tired, so tired. I don't know how much longer I can keep going like this." Tom kissed her forehead, his voice filled with love. "You've been through so much already, Sarah, but you're stronger than you realize. You've already come so far. You've shown me what true strength is, and I'll be here with you every step of the way." Sarah smiled weakly, grateful for his support, but the fear still lingered in the back of her mind. She wasn't ready to give up, but there were days when the weight of everything seemed too much to bear. The thought of leaving Tom and the kids, of not being there to see them grow up, filled her with a deep, aching sorrow. The next few days were some of the hardest Sarah had faced. She was physically drained, mentally exhausted, and emotionally vulnerable. The reality of her diagnosis still weighed heavily on her, and despite the progress she had made, there were moments when the fear of relapse crept in. What if the chemotherapy stopped working? What if the cancer came back stronger than before? These were the questions that kept her up at night, and as much as she tried to push them aside, they were always there, lurking in the back of her mind. But in the midst of the fear, Sarah found herself clinging to the small moments of joy. One afternoon, when she was feeling particularly weak, Tom brought Ella and Max into the living room to spend time with her. The kids had been busy with their schoolwork and after-school activities, and Sarah hadn't had much time with them lately. But when they walked in, their faces lit up with excitement, and for a brief moment, all the fear and uncertainty faded away. "Mom, look what we made," Ella dijo, sosteniendo un cuadro que había hecho en clase de arte. The vibrant colors and happy faces on the paper brought a smile to Sarah's face, and for a moment she felt like her old self again. Max, not to be outdone by his sister, came over with a homemade card. "This is for you, Mom," he said, handing it to her with a proud grin. "I made it because you're the best mom ever." Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she looked at her children. They were her world, the reason she was fighting so hard. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that she had to be there for them. She had to be there for every school play, every birthday, every milestone. She couldn't imagine missing out on any. "Thank you, both of you," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "You're my heart." As the kids climbed up onto the couch beside her, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for them, for the family she loved more than anything. She was fighting for the chance to watch them grow up, to see them become the people they were meant to be. The following week brought more positive news. Dr. Harris was cautiously optimistic. The tumors were continuing to shrink, and while there was still a long road ahead, the progress was undeniable. Sarah's body was responding well to the treatment, and Dr. Harris seemed hopeful that she could continue on this path toward recovery. "Sarah," Dr. Harris said during their visit, I want to continue with the chemotherapy, but I think we're seeing a real shift. Your body is responding well. It's still going to be a difficult journey, but I'm confident that we're moving in the right direction." For the first time in a long time, Sarah allowed herself to feel a sense of relief. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the battle was far from over, but the fact that she was making progress was enough to keep her going. She had a reason to keep fighting, and that reason was her family. They were her motivation, her strength, and her hope. The days that followed were filled with more small victories. Days when Sarah felt a little stronger, a little more like herself. She had more energy than before, and though the side effects of chemotherapy still lingered, she could see the light at the end of the tunnel. She wasn't done yet, but she was getting closer to the life she wanted to reclaim. Sarah's journey was far from over, but she knew one thing for sure. She was not going to give up. She had too much to live for. And with the support of Tom, her children, and her own inner strength, she was ready to face whatever came next. The weeks after Sarah's last doctor's appointment were filled with a sense of cautious optimism. While she still had a long road ahead, the fact that the tumors were continuing to shrink filled her with a renewed sense of hope. Sarah had always been a fighter, but now she felt as if her body was finally starting to catch up with her determination. Every morning, she woke up with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to face another day of treatment, another day of pushing through the exhaustion and the fear. But the journey was far from over. Every step forward felt like a victory, but there were days when the weight of the disease still hung heavily on her shoulders. There were nights when the fear of relapse crept in, reminding her that the fight wasn't finished yet. Every time she thought she was getting closer to recovery, she was reminded that cancer didn't just disappear. It was a constant threat, always lingering in the background. Still, Sarah refused to give in to the fear. She had come too far to let it control her. She had learned to embrace the uncertainty, to live with the possibility that her future might look different than she had once imagined. But that didn't mean she wasn't going to fight with everything she had. She would face each day with hope, with determination, and with the support of the people who loved her. One evening, as Sarah sat in the living room with Tom, they had a conversation that had been a long time coming. For months, Sarah had been trying to shield Tom from her deepest fears, from the thoughts that kept her awake at night. But tonight, as the weight of everything she had been through settled over her, she realized that she couldn't keep pretending. Tom sat beside her, his eyes filled with concern as he gently touched her hand. "How are you really doing, Sarah?" he asked softly. "I know you're putting on a brave face for the kids and for me, but I want to know how you're really feeling. You don't have to hide it from me anymore." Sarah looked at him, her heart heavy with emotion. She had tried so hard to protect him from her fears, from the deep well of anxiety that had taken root inside her. But now, she knew that he needed to understand what she was going through. He deserved to know the truth. "I'm scared, Tom," Sarah admitted, her voice breaking. "I'm scared that the cancer will come back. I'm scared that I won't be here to see the kids grow up, that I won't be able to grow old with you." Tom's face softened, and he pulled her into a gentle embrace. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But Sarah, I believe in you. I've seen how strong you are, how far you've come. You're fighting, and that's what matters. We're going to get through this together." Sarah leaned into his arms, feeling the warmth of his love surround her. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear those words, how much she needed to lean on him. For so long, she had tried to protect him from the weight of her fears, but now she understood that they were in this together. They always had been. The following weeks brought even more positive news from Dr. Harris. Sarah's tumors were continuing to shrink, and her scans showed that the cancer was retreating. The chemotherapy was working, and though there was still a long way to go, the progress was undeniable. Dr. Harris was cautiously optimistic, reminding Sarah that while things were looking good, they still needed to continue the treatments and monitor her closely. "You're responding well to the treatment, Sarah," Dr. Harris said during their latest visit. "But I want to emphasize that this is a long-term fight. We need to keep up the momentum, but I'm confident that you're on the right track." Hearing those words made Sarah's heart swell with hope, but she also understood the gravity of the situation. She wasn't out of the woods yet. The road ahead was still uncertain, and the battle wasn't over. But for the first time in months, she allowed herself to feel like there was light at the end of the tunnel. She wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting for a future, for her family, and for the life she still believed she could have. At home, Sarah's recovery began to reflect the strength she had always carried within her. The fatigue was still a constant companion, and there were days when she had to rest for hours, but she began to experience more good days than bad. She could play with the kids again, even if just for a short time. She could walk around the block without feeling like she was going to collapse. The things she had once taken for granted, like walking, eating, and talking, had become precious gifts. One afternoon, as Sarah and Tom were sitting on the porch, watching the kids play, Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow across the horizon. The air was warm, and the laughter of Ella and Max filled the space around them. Tom turned to her, his hand resting on hers, and for a moment, everything felt right. "I think I'm starting to believe it, Tom," Sarah said softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I think I'm starting to believe that I can do this. I can beat this." Tom smiled, his eyes filled with love and pride. "I've always believed in you, Sarah. You've been fighting this from the start, and I know you're going to keep fighting until it's over." Sarah smiled back, her heart full of love for him, for their children, for everything that she had fought so hard to keep. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment, she knew that she had a future with her family, a future where she would continue to live, to love, and to fight. As Sarah continued with her treatments, she began to adjust to the new normal. The chemotherapy cycles had become a routine, but each one felt like a new chapter in her journey. The side effects were still there, but they were no longer as overwhelming as they had once been. The fear of relapse was always in the back of her mind, but Sarah had learned to face it. She had learned to embrace the uncertainty of it all and to hold on to the hope that one day she would be able to look back on this chapter of her life as a victory. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everything she held dear. And with each passing day, she was getting closer to the life she had always dreamed of. The battle was far from over, but Sarah had never been more determined to win. The final months of Sarah's treatment brought a sense of resolution, though the battle was far from easy. The chemotherapy was still taking its toll, but Sarah had learned to embrace the process. She had become accustomed to the ups and downs, the good days and the bad. She knew now that recovery wasn't just about the physical act of healing, it was about a mindset. It was about choosing to live, choosing to fight, even when the future seemed uncertain. Dr. Harris continued to monitor her progress closely, and every visit brought more good news. The tumors were shrinking, the cancer was receding, and Sarah's body was responding to the chemotherapy in a way that made the doctors cautiously optimistic. But despite the positive reports, Sarah had learned not to take anything for granted. She was still in the fight, still enduring the side effects of the treatment. And she knew that she would have to continue the fight until the cancer was completely gone. But the fear of relapse, though still present, had begun to fade. Sarah had come to understand that, in a way, the fight against cancer wasn't just about surviving the illness. It was about learning to live with the uncertainty, learning to live fully in the moments that mattered. She had spent so much time focusing on the future, on what might happen, that she had almost forgotten to enjoy the present. But with every small victory, every moment of joy with her children and Tom, Sarah had learned to appreciate what she had, right here, right now. One afternoon, a few months after her final round of chemotherapy, Sarah found herself sitting in the living room, watching Ella and Max play in the yard. They were growing up so quickly, and Sarah realized just how much she had missed in the past year. The milestones, the birthdays, the little moments that made life so special. But she wasn't going to dwell on the time she had lost. Instead, she focused on the time she had gained. And she was determined to make the most of every moment, no matter how small. Tom joined her on the porch, sitting beside her with a cup of coffee in his hand. He had been her constant throughout this entire journey, her rock, her strength, her unwavering support. Sarah looked at him, seeing the love and the weariness in his eyes, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. "How are you feeling?" Tom asked, his voice soft but filled with concern. Sarah smiled, her heart swelling with love for him. "I'm feeling alive. I'm feeling like myself again. I've missed this. Missed just sitting here, watching the kids. I've missed the simplicity of it all." Tom reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I've missed it too. But we're getting there. We're getting back to the life we've always wanted." Sarah nodded, her eyes misting over. "We are. I'm not ready to give up on this life, Tom. I'm not ready to give up on us." The days turned into weeks, and as Sarah's recovery continued, her life slowly began to return to normal. There were still appointments with Dr. Harris, still scans to check for any signs of the cancer returning, but Sarah felt stronger than she had in months. The fear of the disease still lingered, but it no longer consumed her. She had learned to live with it, to accept that the future was uncertain, but that didn't mean she couldn't enjoy the present. One day, after a follow-up appointment with Dr. Harris, Sarah received the news she had been waiting for. The cancer was in remission. The tumors were gone, and the scans showed no signs of recurrence. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt the weight of the world lift off her shoulders. She had made it. She had beaten the odds. She sat in the exam room with Tom, the tears streaming down her face as the reality of the news sank in. She had done it. She had fought with everything she had, and she had come out on the other side. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, thriving, and embracing the life she had fought so hard to keep. "I did it, Tom," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I really did it. Tom pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the tears flowed. We did it, Sarah. We did it together. The months that followed were filled with moments of joy, moments of healing, and moments of gratitude. Sarah began to regain her strength, her energy, and her sense of self. She returned to work as a nurse, her passion for helping children stronger than ever. She watched as Ella and Max grew up, each day feeling like a new blessing. She celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and everyday moments with her family, cherishing the time she had, knowing how precious it truly was. And as Sarah looked back on the journey she had been through, she realized that the cancer had changed her. It had taught her to appreciate the small moments, to live with intention, and to never take anything for granted. It had shown her the power of love, of family, and of resilience. And though the scars of her battle would never fully fade, they were no longer a source of pain. They were reminders of how far she had come, of the strength she had discovered within herself. As Sarah sat on the porch, watching Tom play with the kids in the yard, she felt a deep sense of peace. The fear of cancer no longer controlled her. It no longer had a hold on her life. She had survived, and now she was living again. In that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what the future held, she had already won. She had fought for the life she wanted, and she had gotten it back. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all.